Lesson 21. How your bot talks to an exchange, and how to keep your keys safe up to this point. We've been working with Freqtrade mostly in simulation. You've backtested. You've paper traded. The bot is doing its thing on your machine, and no real money has moved anywhere. At some point though, if you want this to actually trade for you, the bot needs to reach out and touch a real exchange. It needs to know the live price of Bitcoin. Check how much USDT is sitting in your account. Place a buy order when your strategy says so. Place a sell when it is time to exit. And the way it does all of that is through something called an API. So before we go live, we need to talk about API keys. What they are, how the connection actually works, and honestly, mostly how to not get yourself robbed. Because this is the lesson where mistakes cost real money, and the rules are unforgiving. What an API actually is. API stands for Application Programming Interface, which is a mouthful, but the idea is simple. When you log into Binance or OKX on your phone, you are using their website, clicking around, typing, seeing charts. That interface is built for humans. An API is the same exchange's interface, but built for programs. It is a way for code to ask the exchange questions and give it instructions without ever going through the website. So instead of you opening the app and reading the price, Freqtrade sends a request that basically says, "Hey Binance, what is the last traded price of BTCUSD?" And the exchange sends back a number. Or instead of you clicking buy, Freqtrade sends a request that says, "Buy $50 of ETH at market price." And the exchange does it. That is the whole mechanism. It is just a back and forth of messages between your program and the exchange's servers. To make this work, the exchange needs to know it is actually you asking. Obviously, you can't have just anyone sending buy orders on your account. And that is where API keys come in. An API key is basically a long string of characters that acts as your username. And it comes paired with something called a secret, which acts like a password. Together, they identify you. Whenever Freqtrade talks to the exchange, it includes these credentials in the request. The exchange checks them, and if they match an account with the right permissions, the request goes through. How Freqtrade uses these keys here is the picture I want you to have in your head. Freqtrade is a Python program running on your machine or on a server. Underneath, it uses a library called CCXT, which is essentially a translator. Every exchange speaks a slightly different dialect, and CCXT knows all of them. So, Freqtrade tells CCXT, "Place this order on Binance," and CCXT knows how to phrase that in exactly the way Binance expects. Same request, rephrased for Bybit or Kraken or OKX. That is why Freqtrade supports over 100 exchanges out of the box. It is not writing custom code for each one. It is leaning on CCXT. So in your config file, you tell Freqtrade which exchange you are using, you give it your API key and secret, and from that point on, every market data request, every balance check, every order placement flows through CCXT to the exchange and back. The exchange sees these requests coming from your account, authorized by your key, and responds accordingly. That is the mechanics. Now let's get into the part that actually matters, which is doing all of this safely. Creating an API key the right way. Every major exchange has an API management page buried somewhere in account settings. The exact clicks differ, but the flow is the same. You log in, you navigate to API management, you click create, and the exchange generates a key and a secret for you. A couple of things happen during creation that I want you to pay attention to. First, the secret. That password-like part is usually shown to you exactly once. The exchange displays it on screen right after creation, and then never again. If you don't copy it down right then, you can't get it back. You'd have to delete the key and make a new one. So before you close that tab, copy both the key and the secret into a password manager. Not a text file on your desktop, not a sticky note, not a screenshot, not a message to yourself on Telegram. A real password manager. I use one, and the reason is simple. That secret is the keys to your funds. You treat it like you treat the password to your bank. Second, the exchange will ask you what you want this key to be allowed to do. This is the part people get wrong, and getting it wrong is how money disappears. Permissions, the single most important setting when you create the key. The exchange shows you a list of permissions, and you tick boxes. There will usually be permissions for reading account data, for spot trading, for margin or futures trading, and crucially, For withdrawals, here is the rule. And I mean it literally. Enable e-reading. Enable spot trading if you are doing spot. That is it. Leave everything else off. Especially with no exceptions, leave withdrawals off. Let me explain why, because this is the line that separates an inconvenience from a catastrophe. If your API key leaks somehow, and it only has trading permissions, the worst case is someone can place trades on your account. They can buy and sell. They might be able to manipulate prices against you, dump your positions, that kind of thing. It is bad, but the funds are still sitting in your account. They can't move the money out. If your key has withdrawal permissions enabled though, the attacker can just transfer your entire balance to their own wallet. Gone. Within seconds. There is no undo. The exchange won't reimburse you because as far as they're concerned, the request came from a valid key with valid permissions. It is not their fault you gave the key the wrong permissions. So the rule is withdrawals off. Always. There is no reason a trading bot needs to withdraw funds. None. If a tutorial or a friend or a YouTube video tells you to enable withdrawals, stop listening. They're wrong. While we're here, only enable futures or margin if you are actually going to trade them. And only after you understand them. Default to off. The principle has a name, least privilege. Give the key the smallest set of permissions it needs to do its job. And nothing more. Everything you add is another way to lose money. IPAL listing. Your second line of defense. There is another setting on most exchanges that I consider almost as important as the permissions. And that is the IP whitelist. The idea is simple. You tell the exchange this API key is only allowed to be used from this specific IP address. Your IP address is basically the street address of your computer or server on the internet. So if your Freqtrade is running on a server whose IP is, say, 203.0.113.42, you put that IP into the allow list when you create the key. From that point on, any request using your key has to come from that IP. If someone steals your key, even your full key with the secret, and tries to use it from their own machine in another country, the exchange just rejects it. The key is useless to them. This is a really powerful safety net. It means even if your key leaks, you've got a layer of protection that the attacker can't get around without also compromising your server. It is not a substitute for keeping the key secret, but it is a belt to go with your suspenders. The catch is that your server needs a stable IP. If you are running Freqtrade on your laptop at home, your IP probably changes every once in a while when your router reconnects, and every time it changes, your key stops working until you update the allow list. That is annoying but not catastrophic. For a real deployment, most people rent a virtual server from somewhere like AWS or Hetzner or DigitalOcean, and those usually come with a fixed IP, which makes this much cleaner. You can find your server's IP by running a tiny command on the server itself, the kind that asks an external service what IP it sees you coming from. The output is just a string of numbers. That is what you paste into the exchange's allow list. Don't put your keys in the code now. Let's talk about where you actually keep the key in secret once you've got them, because this trips people up constantly. The instinct is to open your config file and just paste the key right in there next to the exchange name. And it works. Freqtrade will read it and connect fine. The problem is what happens later. Config files get shared. They get copy-pasted into GitHub repos, into Discord messages, into screenshots. People post their config on a forum to ask for help and forget they left their keys in it. This is one of the single most common ways keys leak, and the bad guys know it. There are literally automated bots that scan GitHub around the clock for committed API keys, and they can drain an account within minutes of it being pushed. So the rule is never write the actual key string inside your config file. Instead, use one of two approaches. The first is environment variables. You store the key and secret in a separate file, usually a hidden file with a name like env, and that file just defines them as shell variables. Then in your config, instead of writing the actual key, you write a placeholder that says, look up the value of this environment variable at runtime. Freqtrade handles the substitution. The key never appears in the config file, which means the config file is safe to share, and the env file stays on your machine and nowhere else. The second approach is a separate private config file. You split your config into two pieces. The main config has everything except the secrets, and a second file, often called config, Private. JSON holds just the key and secret. When you start Freqtrade, you tell it to load both files and it merges them together. Same effect. The main config is shareable. The private file is never shared whichever method you use. There is one more critical step. Make sure your Git ignores the file with the secrets in it. If you are using environment variables, your git ignore needs to contain. If you are using a private config, it needs to contain config. Private. JSON. Don't skip this. If you accidentally commit a file with your keys to a public GitHub repo, assume the keys are compromised the moment you push. The bots are fast. And if it ever does happen, the fix is not to delete the file from the repo. The fix is to immediately log into the exchange and delete that API key entirely, create a new one, and never use the old one again. Git history remembers everything. Even after you delete a file, the old commit still has the key, and anyone who looks can still find it. Treat a leaked key as gone forever. Sub-accounts. Don't trade on your main account. One more piece of advice that I think is underused. Most exchanges support something called sub-accounts. A sub-account is a separate account underneath your main one, with its own balances and its own API keys, but still under your control from the main login. The pattern I'd suggest is this. Keep the bulk of your funds in your main account, with no API keys on it at all. The main account is just for storage. Then create a sub-account for your bot. Transfer in only what you are willing to have at risk, and put the API key on the sub-account. The advantage is containment. If your key ever does leak, the worst case is the attacker gets whatever's in that sub-account. Your main balance is untouched, because there is no key that can touch it. You are not trusting the bot with your whole net worth. You are trusting it with a fixed capped amount. You can go further with this too. If you are running multiple strategies, give each one its own sub-account. That way if strategy A's key leaks, strategy B isn't affected, and you can see clearly which one is which when you are looking at the books. Other ways keys leak. I want to mention a few of the less obvious leak paths, because they catch people by surprise. Screen sharing is one. If you ever share your screen on a call, or record a video, or stream, and you happen to have your config file or your Exchange's API page open, the key is on camera. People have lost keys this way. If you are going to share your screen, close everything sensitive first. Same goes for taking screenshots to ask for help. Blur the key, or better, replace it with a fake before you take the shot. Logs are another. Some verbose logging settings will print out parts of your configuration, and if those logs end up in a chat or a forum post, your key goes with them. Keep your log verbosity reasonable, and if you are pasting a log somewhere to debug, read through it first. And finally, public computers and untrusted networks. Don't log into your exchange and don't touch your API page from a coffee shop Wi-Fi or a shared work machine. The risk isn't worth it. Do all of this from a machine you control, on a network you trust. What if something goes wrong? Let me give you the emergency playbook. Because if you ever need it, you don't want to be figuring it out in the moment. If you suspect your key has leaked for any reason, the first thing you do is log into the exchange and disable or delete that key. Not in 5 minutes. Now, every second the key is alive is a second the attacker can use it. Once the key is dead, then you check your account. Look at recent trades, look at recent withdrawals. Look at the API access logs, the exchange keeps. Make sure nothing weird happened. Then, once you've confirmed the account is intact, create a new key with the same safety settings we talked about. Put it in your config, restart Freqtrade, and you are back up. If you spot actual unauthorized trades or withdrawals, the playbook is bigger. Disable all your API keys. Freeze the account through the exchange's support if you can. Change your account password, rotate your two-factor authentication, and seriously consider moving the remaining funds to a brand new wallet or a hardware wallet until you understand what happened. Treat it like a break-in because it is one. Pulling it together, the honest summary here is that the technical setup is not complicated. You create a key, you put it in a config, you run Freqtrade, it connects. What is complicated is the discipline around it. The same setup that lets your bot trade for you also lets anyone else who gets hold of the key trade for you. So build good habits from the start. Withdrawals off, IP allow list on, keys and environment variables or a private config, Git ignoring the secrets file, and a sub-account with a capped balance. Do those 5 things and you've eliminated the vast majority of the ways people lose money at this stage. there are also some smaller habits worth picking up. Rotate your keys every few months, even if nothing's wrong, just to limit how long any one key is in circulation. Turn on every security notification the exchange offers. Logins, withdrawals, API changes, so that if something does happen, you hear about it immediately rather than discovering it a week later. And run a quick drill now and then, where you deliberately disable your own key just to see how long it takes you to react. If that number is measured in minutes, you are in good shape. If it takes you an hour to even notice, your monitoring needs work. In the next lesson, we'll pull all of this together into a proper pre-live checklist, so by the time you flip the switch to real trading, you've actually thought through each piece. Configuring the API is just one item on that list, but it is the one where the consequences of sloppiness are by far the steepest, which is why it gets a whole lesson to itself. Get this part right, and the rest of going live is mostly details.